Hey kids, today we're going to talk about the consequences of exchanges. We're going to talk about the cultural consequences and the environmental consequences. So first we'll talk about the cultural, but what you're going to be filling out on your notes is this last slide here. You could just bullet point and make sure you talk about the major ideas that I talk about. You could also find the major ideas not just in this lecture, but also in the readings posted. So this is a cultural consequence learning objective and the historical developments within the framework of your AP World History class. So go ahead and pause this video and read through those so you know what to learn about, what you need to learn about. So basically what we're going to be finding are the continuities and changes on culture due to the exchange networks that we had learned about this past week. So let's talk about the religious consequences. Now, there were varying effects of religious consequences because of the exchange of cultures due to all these new trade routes. One was that it served to unify people and provide justifications for a kingdom's leadership. It also influenced literacy and art, specifically Greek literacy, Islamic literacy, and it fused or coexisted with native religions. And that's this idea of syncretism, right? When one religion kind of is combined with another, it syncretizes. It's called syncretism. So let's talk about the spread of Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism. And because of these spreads, religion becomes very powerful in the world. Again, as mentioned before, syncretism is just when people encounter new ideas, they adopt some of them while keeping some of their old traditions or customs. It's a blend of two or more cultural beliefs, practices, and traditions into a new cultural system. This is one of the important terms that you need to know within this unit. And also, I didn't put this in the lecture, but it might be good to write this down. Diasporatic communities, those are just communities where merchants who traded on these trade routes ended up settling down in the places that they traded. So foreigners, right? Let's look at Buddhism first by looking at the way Buddha is presented in different cultures. Now, Buddhism became famous in China, but it came to China from its birthplace in India via the Silk Roads. Many Chinese monks related Buddhism to familiar Taoist principles, and in time, Buddhist doctrines fused with elements of Taoist traditions to create the syncretic faith called Chan Buddhism, also known as Zen Buddhism. Although some leaders in China did not want China's native religions diminished as a result of the spread of Buddhism, this new Zen Buddhism remained popular among ordinary Chinese citizens. In the Song dynasty, many Confucians among the scholar gentry began to adopt its ideals into their daily lives. The development of printing had made Buddhist scriptures widely available to the Confucian scholar gentry. Buddhist writers also influenced Chinese literature by writing in the vernacular rather than the formal language of Confucian scholars, as practice that became widespread. Early Buddhists did not depict Buddha in any human form. It was said that Buddha did not want to be represented in human form because he did not want to be worshipped as a person or a god. In this footprint image at the center of it, we see the Wheel of Woe. It is also a representation of the Noble Eightfold Path. Uh, Buddha was often symbolized as a footprint. As the story goes, before he died, he left a footprint in the mud as a symbol of the temporariness of life. Like a human body, his footprint would wash away with the next monsoon rain. Eventually, Indian artists began depicting Buddha as he spread throughout the land in different ways, and they gave him a human form. The bun at the top of his head represents the enlightenment, or his enlightenment. The knob represents asceticism. For those of you who forgot what asceticism is, it's just like being super disciplined. You don't give in to any pleasures or any wants in life. The elongated ears in this statue are a reminder of his noble past as the noble in the Kashatara in the caste system. They often wore large, heavy golden earrings that caused their lobes to stretch, as you see in the image here. Mudras or hand gestures are very significant in Buddhist iconography, and all of them mean something different. This one is a symbol of blessing. From India, Buddhism travels to Central Asia, if you guys can see on the map right here. In Central Asia, images of the Buddha changed and they began to adopt a Greek characteristic because if you can see from the map, Central Asia is closer to the Mediterranean Sea and it's along the Silk Road. One thing we also see are solar disk and the wearing of the toga. The toga was what Greeks wore, and the solar disk represented holiness. And we also see the change from the knob on the head to more of a Greek-like hair to adopt those Greek characteristics. Again, we see hair now instead of a headdress. Now, as Buddhism leaves Central Asia, it travels to Duanwang, which is basically in China, still in central China, but moving more towards the Chinese mainland. In this city, it's an oasis town between the Talakamakan and the Gobi Desert. It is here that the two branches of the Silk Road rejoin. Not surprisingly, a large Buddhist community and monastery emerged there. If we look at these images, we see all of those cultural syncretism. And this one, Buddha in Duanhang, begins to take on a Taoist influences, such as a dominance of nature. Again, once the closer Buddha gets to China, the mainland of China, the more Taoist principles it takes, such as a dominance of nature here. The Buddha is also wearing fancy silk robes because silk was exported out of Buddha through the exchange networks. Hence, we call the main exchange network in Asia the Silk Road. Now, again, we see Buddhism moves farther east, and as it moves more east, it adopts more Asian features. For instance, we see slanted eyes here, or narrowed eyes of a Chinese monk. And we also be able to see that the Chinese wear, right? Even closer to the silk robes of silk. Now here we see another type of monk. Now this is a Yuagwar monk, and he was depicted as a savage because these guys were more nomadic people. Here's another example of more Asian features as Buddhism spread towards East Asia. We see a teapot here because, again, tea originates in China. Buddhism also spread as far as Korea and Japan and all the way back down to Southeast Asia in Vietnam. Buddhism and Hinduism also traveled to Southeast Asia, where Buddhism and Hinduism was kind of combined, synchronized. For example, we see Buddha here being presented with multiple arms, like the Hindu god Vishnu. And eventually, over time, Buddha actually becomes a god in Hindu religion as well. Let's go ahead and look at Christianity and the changing faces of Jesus now. Again, now Christianity began in the Middle East. And from the Middle East, the Christianity spreads throughout the Mediterranean, specifically first the Greek states. And in the Greek states, Jesus begins to take on the characteristic of Greek gods. Here in this little tiny image, we see Jesus, the Son of God, is interpreted as the sun god Helios. And the Greek sun god Helios was often depicted riding a chariot across the sky with a solar disk around his head, symbolizing the sun. Now here we see a representation of Jesus, and we see him depicted like Helios in this small image. Specifically, the big main thing that they adopted was iconography, which was the depiction of holiness or a halo with this seal around their head. From the Greek states, Christianity then spreads to the Roman Empire in Italy. Within Rome, Christianity continued to adopt Greco-Roman characteristics, and we begin seeing Jesus and his followers wearing traditional Greco-Roman robes, right, the dress. We also see beardless Jesus become known because only barbarians wore beards, which were constantly trying to invade the Roman Empire. From Rome, Christianity spreads throughout Europe. Now, as the Germanic barbarians invade Rome and start to take over the Roman Empire's lands, Jesus starts to take Germanic tribal characteristics, such as having white skin and a beard again. We also see as trade through the Red Sea opens up, we see Christianity spread through northern or northeast Africa, specifically Ethiopia down here. Now, trade through the Red Sea brings Christianity to the kingdom of Ascom, later called Ethiopia, Greek for the dark-skinned people. In Ethiopia, Jesus is depicted with dark skin and African hairstyles. And there are many cultural consequences of connectivity in these exchange networks. Specifically, we see the spread of religions. We see religions becoming more powerful, and we see religions kind of combining through a syncretism. We also see these things down here that we'll get to later in this lecture. Here, I want you guys to go ahead and pause the video and take note of how Islam was spread. But in summary, it spread through Africa. Specifically, Islam became the center of learning in Timbuktu. In Southeast Asia, it recruited members of the Asian cultures as well, specifically Hinduism, because it opened up opportunities for people in the lowest caste of the caste system. And it also spread to areas such as Southeast Asia, where Muslim rulers and Java combined Mongol Indian features, local traditions, and Chinese Buddhist and Confucian traits. Outside of religious cultural consequences of exchange, let's look at the literacy culture aspects of it, specifically through science and technology. Because of the exchange networks, Greek literature classics were translated into Arabic because these Greek writings were sent to the Arabic Empire or the Islamic empires. We also see the spread of mathematics from India, the spread of papermaking from China, and scholars studied medicine from the Greeks and Egyptians and Mesopotamians, which led to advances in surgeries and hospital care throughout the world. Here was an image of papermaking. This is how the Chinese would make paper. I don't know the steps to it, but I thought this image was pretty cool because it's an original one. So if you're more interested in papermaking, you can go ahead and Google that. Technology-wise, because of the new seafaring through the Indian Ocean trade routes, we see the exchange of the new technologies that came with it, such as the magnetic compass, the astrolabe, and these lanterne sails that help ships go faster with multiple directions of the sails. Now, due to these exchange of cultures, some cities grew more powerfully where some declined. Now, then the ones that grew more powerfully, they had a series of urbanization due to population growth. Now, there were many factors to this urbanization. For instance, in the growing cities such as Samarkand and Hangzhou, political stability and the decline of invasions allowed the city to prosper economically. There was also safe and reliable transportation. There was a rise in commerce due to the rise of populations, and there was a plentiful labor supply due to this new urbanization, which eventually increased agricultural output, which allowed these flourishing cities to feed their populations. Now, there were some declining cities. I have Kashgar down here. Now, Kashgar initially became very rich off the exchange networks, and then it went through a period of decline because of political instability and invasions. Constantinople is also an example of this, where disease and also decline of agricultural productivity were factors contributing to the decline of cities. When I say disease, I specifically mean the bubonic plague, which we'll get to here soon. Now, if you guys want to know specifics about these cities and how they declined or grew, you need to go check out your readings. Now, there were many travelers in these exchange networks, but we have three famous ones that you're probably going to see on the AP test. The first one is Marco Polo. Now, Marco Polo was an Italian native from Venice. He visited the court of Kublai Khan in the Mongolian Empire. And when he visited there, the Chinese cities impressed Polo. After Polo returned to Italy in 1295, he wrote a book about his travels. However, many Europeans refused to believe his descriptions of China's size, wealth, and wonders. Only when other Europeans followed Polo's route to China did people start to accept that China was prosperous and innovative. Polo's captivating descriptions of the customs of the people he met intrigued many Europeans to go out and travel. So you probably will see a primary source from his travels on the AP test. Now, you've heard a little bit about Ibn Battuta in this class already, but again, he was just 21 years old when he started to travel. He was a Muslim scholar from northern Africa, specifically Morocco, and he set out to see the world. Over 30 years, Ibn Battuta traveled through Central Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, China, Spain, North Africa, and Mali, mainly to Muslim lands. After telling his tales to the Sultan of Morocco, Battuta was told to dictate an account of the cities which he had seen on his travels and of the interesting events which had clung to his memory, and that he should speak of those whom he had met, of the rulers of the countries, of their distinguished men of learning, and of their pious saints. So he was sent on a mission to learn about the cultures and write about them. And you guys have seen them in some of your DBQs already. You will see them in future ones as well. Now in the middle we have Margaret Kemp. She was one of the first people to write an autobiography in England, in English at least. She dictated her book to scribes who wrote down her descriptions of her pilgrimages to Jerusalem, Rome, Germany, and Spain. She does relate details of her travel experiences, such as being so overcome by the sight of Jerusalem as she approached it that she nearly fell off her donkey. However, her book is also significant because it first is a first-hand account of a middle-class medieval woman's life. Kemp conveys both the intense spiritual visions and feelings of her experiences and the trials of everyday life for a woman with 14 children. So now that we've seen the cultural consequences of exchange through travelers, through religion, and through the growth of populations and the exchange of those cultures, let's talk about the environmental consequences. So go ahead and read what you're supposed to know for the AP test here. This is, again, taken directly out of the framework. But to summarize, it's basically the continuities and changes on the environment due to the growth of exchange networks. Now, there are many different agricultural consequences to this spread of exchange networks. Some specific ones we can look at: champa rice. It was introduced to China from Vietnam, and basically what that did was able to feed the growing population in China, and it led to further urbanization and a more prosperous Chinese state. China just didn't become prosperous of eating rice, but also it became prosperous in rice because it used it as a way to pay taxes or from tribute from states that they had occupied, such as Vietnam. Now, champa rice was so awesome because it was drought resistant, it was flood resistant, it was capable of yielding 2 crops a year, which was not normal because normally crops only yield once a year. And it met the needs of the growing populations. However, champa rice also had an impact on land use because it was used through terrace farming in the uplands and paddies in the lowlands of China. However, champa rice was also grown in areas where people thought land was unusable at one point, thus making it even more significant. Also, people tended to migrate more southward after the introduction of champa rice because they were just following the amount of rice trail almost. They started urbanizing in those cities more in South Asia. Now, bananas were pretty much exchanged through the Indian Ocean. They went from Indonesia, which is Southeast Asia, the islands down there, all the way to Africa. And then citrus crops were also introduced to Africa from Indonesia. And again, these were from seafarers traveling the Indian Ocean. And I know it says just China there, but it's actually everywhere. And I'm going to show you on a map here soon. Crops weren't the only thing exchanged. So was disease. For example, the Black Death. Okay, the Black Death killed half of the world's population, and it spread throughout exchange networks. Now, the Black Death was able to spread so easily for a multitude of reasons. One being that the Mongols kept the roads safe, so traders were willing to use the roads. Also, the Crusaders during the Crusades contracted this virus or this Black Plague, this Black Death, and that spread as they tried to spread Christianity and go to war throughout the world. The Black Death pretty much affected Europe the worst. It completely ended feudalism because the workforce had been killed. Nearly half the population was killed off by the Black Death. Some other things that you might hear about it is that not only was it spread through traders, but also spread through rats or insects that spread or flew across the Silk Road. Now, what were the bad things? The bad things that came for the environment due to the exchange of crops and these trade networks. Well, an increase of population led to more resources or land being used, which led to two major big things. The first thing is overgrazing, and we see that mostly in Africa and the Middle East, where people overgraze the land and with these new animals, and because of that, the land becomes unusable, and then people end up having to completely leave these cities because of lack of food and resources there. Deforestation was also a major negative consequence of exchange networks, specifically in Europe. Again, there's not a lot of land to farm in Europe, so they were destroying their forests to make land to farm, and this led to soil erosion, which reduced agricultural production, which reduced the amount of food for people to eat. So while in China you see the increase in population, in Europe you see the decrease in population. If you want to pause this video and check out all of the exchange networks here, where they came from and what was being traded or given away when we talk about disease. So go ahead and take a look at this just so you can have a visual image of where all these things were going and coming from. Once you guys are done checking out this map and taking notes on the consequences of exchange networks, you are done.